Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls, hot on the heels of my last video which was very well received. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I keep my ball pythons and husbandry in general. In the last video we talked about the tropical climate that these snakes come from and the tropical climate that my own snake room offers without having to make any adjustments at all. I just work with the natural temperature, and temperature cycles during the year are virtually non-existent. The room is pretty rock solid, stable temperature, exactly the same temperature all day, every day, week in, week out, throughout the year. Now, one of the techniques that I have used successfully in my breeding program to condition my females for breeding is something which I'm going to call food cycling. We're going to have a look at that, and we're going to have a look at how food cycling affects when I will choose a young female that is probably sexually mature, when I would select the right time to begin pairing that female. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the physiology of snakes and what happens when you feed them. Snakes are not like mammals. They do not need to eat every day or they get hungry. Snakes function in a completely different way. Typically we feed our snakes weekly, and this is probably way too much. What happens when a snake eats a meal is all its internal organs enlarge. The heart, the liver, the pancreas, the kidneys all expand by up to 60%. Its oxygen uptake increases by 60%. In effect, when your snake eats a meal, it goes into full afterburner. Its metabolism is supercharged. We like to say that when our snake has a poo, it's now empty, and we weigh our snake and get an empty weight. This is just ridiculous. If you know anything at all about snake physiology, you will know that when a snake poos, its internal organs are still hugely enlarged and its metabolism is still running on afterburner. It will take another 10 to 14 days at least after your snake has voided in order for its internal organs to start to shrink back to normal size and for its metabolism to slow down. Your snake will naturally, over a period of 2 to 3 weeks after eating, will slowly slow its metabolism back to a tick over. This is perfectly natural. It's how our snakes are designed to function. This female was awake earlier. This is a snake which is about 18 months old. She is coming up to size around about 1500 grams, but she has never been on hunger strike. She has never gone through a 1000-gram wall. And the thing I want you to notice about this snake is that it's quite long but not particularly girthy. Snakes have two fat glands that run down the base of their tail here, where unlike humans and mammals which store fat subcutaneously, a snake, when it stores food reserves, stores it in these two organs down the back of its tail here. So even after your snake has slowed its metabolism down to a tick over, after 2 or 3 weeks after eating, its fuel tanks are still full. It still has a full tank of gas right here in the fat reserves at the tail. So what we do with our females here at Royal Balls is to naturally make use of that snake physiology. In the off season they get fed a lot less. They have a chance to slow their metabolism down to tick over and take a rest from digesting food. At the start of the breeding season we switch back on the afterburners and they start the breeding season fully supercharged and ready to build those follicles. They're not overweight, they do not have excessive sized fat glands, and this stimulates them to produce follicles more than anything else that I could do with temperatures here in the tropics in my snake room. So with that, let's get into looking at some young females and let's talk about food cycling. Alright guys, I want to talk a little bit today about when the right time is to breed a young female, what are the criteria that I look for, and also a technique that I use out here in the tropics where the environment is extremely stable, a technique that I've been using quite successfully for a number of years now in order to prepare my females for the breeding season. Let's talk a little bit about the natural climate where these ball pythons come from, tropical West Africa, one of the most stable environments on the planet. Very little seasonal variation in temperature, very little seasonal variation in nighttime temperatures. It never gets cold. Temperatures do drop in the wet season. Because I live in the tropics at almost exactly the same latitude as West Africa, my climate is exactly the same. These snakes get naturally exactly what they get in their natural environment. So I don't have heat mats. I have an AC in the room primarily to keep these snakes cool when the temperature gets too hot outside. I very rarely have to use it because I'm in a downstairs room. It's insulated and buffered from the outside temperature. My snake room remains at around about 29 degrees centigrade year round, day in, day out, day and night. There is very little temperature variation at all throughout the season. In the wet season, temperatures do drop a little bit, probably to around 28. It maybe drops by a centigrade. And in the dry season, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's still very wet, it just rains a little bit less. In the dry season, temperatures rise in the snake room to about 30. If temperatures rise to about 31 centigrade, then I do start to use a touch of AC just to cool it down a little bit. So my primary concern here in the tropics is keeping my snakes cool. I don't have to warm them up using heat mats. So I have tried temperature cooling. I have tried dropping my ambient temperatures. Remember, I don't have heat mats, so there's nothing to control there. I have tried dropping my temperatures in the wet season using the AC to about 28 centigrade. And my snakes have not responded at all. What they do respond to is what's going on outside. If the wet season comes, the snakes are primed and ready to breed. Nothing that I do inside this room here will change that. The snakes are on their own schedule. They breed depending upon the seasons outside, and nothing that I do in the room here makes any difference. I have had eggs from April all the way through to December. My males have sperm all year round, and they will lock with females all year round. One technique that I have used very successfully is food cycling. The reason that I brought this girl out here is that I noticed the other day when I read her label that she is exactly 2 years old, and I had no plans to breed her this year. I still have no plans to breed her this year. She is not giving me any signs that she wants to breed. She's not been bull wrapping. She hasn't gained any extra girth. No signs whatsoever that this girl is ready to breed. I did weigh her and she is a fraction under 1500 grams. At 2 years old, many of you would have paired this snake up already, and I do think, depending upon where you are, that this snake would certainly be ready to breed. She does need to put on a little bit of extra weight during her build. I don't think this girl, if I ultrasounded her, would have any decent sized follicles. So you probably have about 6 months to put weight on this girl. So no plans to breed her this year, and the food regime that she has been on means that she has not been prepped like my other females. When I'm growing snakes up, I tend to feed them weekly, and this girl has fed weekly very well for the last 2 years, and she is now up to 1500 grams and 2 years old. I am now well into my breeding season, and this girl has not been paired. I never even considered pairing her, and the reason is she's not been food cycled. She's been feeding regularly every week, as we do with our grow-ons to get them up to size, my breeder females that I am breeding, in the off season I stop feeding. Not completely, but certainly my females get fed every 2 weeks to every month, which sounds a little harsh. That's a little unusual. Most people do not do that, but I assure you that my snakes are perfectly healthy and they suffer none the worst for a little break from food. A month without food for a 2.5 kilo female is no issue whatsoever. So for the 6 months when I'm not breeding them, they get fed a lot less than I would normally feed. My males, they're fed once a month, sometimes even less than that. This has two advantages for me. The feeding response on feeding day is always awesome. These guys are always ready to eat and very rarely do they refuse food. The other advantage of food cycling is that come the breeding season, I can start to pump food into my breeder females like there's no tomorrow, and I find that that is a trigger to start them breeding. If I coincide that with the start of the rainy season, these females will pound food throughout the rainy season and then lay their eggs when the rainy season ends, which is the time of maximum fertility out here in the tropics. That's when all the birds are nesting, that's when all the rodents are having their babies, that's when everything is breeding out here in the tropics, and the availability of prey goes sky high. So I simulate that in my breeding program. Rather than cycle temperatures, which I've had very little success with, I cycle food, and these females respond quite well. So this girl at 2 years old and 1500 grams would be a perfect candidate for breeding, except that she is a little bit late with the seasons. The rainy season is now ending and some of my girls are already ovulating. The ones that have been bred are already ovulating, and this girl has not been paired and not been food cycled. So it's quite obvious from looking at the girth of this girl that she is not ready. She will be paired at the start of the rainy season in about October or November at the end of this year. So she'll be 2.5 years old before she's bred. So age, she is probably mature at 2 years old. She is certainly large enough but needs to gain a little weight during her build, and food cycling will do that. So this girl at 1500 grams is now on a reduced feeding schedule because I want to breed her next season. So she will be fed every 3 weeks, or maybe even less than that. And then at the start of the rainy season, when I want to pair this girl up, I will pound her with food. She'll be fed every 7 days to aid digestion. I feed smaller meals, and I find that food cycling, for me at least in the tropics with a very stable environment, I find that food cycling is a much more effective technique for prepping females to breed than anything else that I do. All my females are on their own schedule and they breed depending upon what's happening outside with the seasonal changes rather than anything that's happening inside the room. As I say, I've tried a little bit of cooling. It hasn't worked for me. The females still tend to breed on their own schedule. But one technique that has worked for me is definitely food cycling. So here's a girl that has not been food cycled and is not ready to breed this season, even though she is up to size and she is up to weight. And some of you may be quite surprised that I only noticed yesterday that this girl is 2 years old and I weighed her at 1500 grams. It's because I don't use the weighing scales to determine when my females are ready. I determine when they're ready by how they look. This girl is still very skinny. So let's compare this girl. Incidentally, this is a homegrown female 2 years ago. She is a pastel vanilla Mojave spot nose, I believe. Her mother was just a Pastave vanilla and she looks quite different to her mother, and there was spot nose in the pairing, and I do have her brother in another tub, who also looks quite different to a standard Mojave. Mojave and spot nose together can actually make the identification quite tricky. So I do want to breed this female, and the plan for her is to get Orange Dream and Yellow Belly into this combination. It will be an incomplete dominant combination. There's no recessives here, but that should be quite spectacular in its own right. So I am keen to breed this girl, make no mistake, but I never even thought about breeding her for this year. Let's have a look at another snake which is coming into its second season, and you will see the difference in terms of girth and how food cycling has actually worked to pump this female up. So this is a vanilla clown female, a little bit older, but also a small snake. This snake has never really been a huge snake. She has bred once already, but you can see the difference in the girth of this snake. Even though these snakes are actually comparable in size, this girl is a little bit heavier. She's approaching 2 kilos now, and you can see that it's the extra girth as she builds that produces that size. So if we compare her to this 2-year-old female here who weighs 1500 grams, you can see that the girth on these snakes is vastly different. This girl is building, this girl is not. Now compare this girl here, who is a small snake who is building and will probably go on to lay eggs later in the season. Compare this girl with a similar aged girl who is even bigger. Look at the size and thickness of this girl, and she is also building. You can tell from what the snake is actually doing as to whether they're building or not. Both these snakes are hiding under the paper, and both of them are curled up doing absolutely nothing. They are minimizing their energy expenditure, and they're using all that food that I'm pumping them up with at the start of the breeding season to build those follicles. So this girl here is now already starting to go off food. Her follicles have grown to the size where it actually interferes with her digestive tract, and she cannot eat anymore. So it's very important when you condition your females to make sure that you feed them enough before they go off food. They're not going to eat anymore once those follicles start growing beyond a certain size. So when you reach that size, it's pretty much done in terms of conditioning for the female. She either has eaten enough or she has not. There isn't much you can do about it by the time you get to the stage of her going off food. If her food reserves are insufficient, she will probably reabsorb and not go on to lay. So food cycling has been working extremely well for me. Let's take a look at another female from that same clutch. This female is 2 years old, and I weighed her yesterday at 1520 grams. She is already over that magical 1500 gram size, but is she ready to breed? No, absolutely not. I haven't conditioned her with food, and she has been giving me no indication whatsoever that she wants to breed this year. So this girl will now go in the off season onto my reduced feeding regime, and at the start of the breeding season next year I'll pump her up with food, and that should stimulate her to start building follicles. This girl is actually in shed at the moment. She's still looking a bit dull, but is actually starting to come out of the blue phase, so she will probably shed within the next 2 or 3 days. But I didn't want to hold off making the video just for that. But again, you can see that whilst this girl is well up to size in terms of length, in terms of her body condition, and in terms of her age, she isn't going to be bred this year simply because I have not food cycled her. If I was to pair this snake up now, which I could, because my snakes will breed all year round, the males are always good to go. The danger is that she does not gain the weight that she needs in order to sustain her through that period of no eating and then laying a clutch of eggs, which could rob her of up to 1 kilo of body weight. These snakes are actually designed by nature to try to give us a clutch of eggs even if they're not ready. They respond to stress hormone cortisol in a very different way to mammals, and they will always try to give a clutch of eggs if it is at all possible, and sometimes it can actually kill them. A female will lay a clutch of eggs even if she cannot survive herself, and the reason is that these animals do not suckle, they do not nurture their young. Once the eggs are laid, the female's job is done, and as long as that clutch of eggs survives, it doesn't matter whether she does or does not. She has done her job, she's passed on her genes, and she has done her bit to ensure the survival of the species, even though as an individual she does not survive herself. So just be aware of that. It is possible to kill your snakes by trying to breed them too young. Most of the time it doesn't happen, most of the time we get away with it. Most of the time a female that's not ready will simply reabsorb. Sometimes a small female will go on to give a clutch of eggs, and because she's small she will go off food sooner and for longer than a mature female, and they sometimes have issues when it comes to laying. They can get egg bound, all sorts of other problems. Let's not go into that right now, and each to his own. You do what you want to do with your snakes, but my experience is that typically a young female at that age will not go on to lay anyway, so I tend to hold off. Let me repeat again, I do not use any sort of climate control in my snake room. I use ambient temperature, and my snakes breed with the seasons. And one technique that has worked extremely well for me is food cycling. So again, this girl will go on to a reduced feeding regime now. I will cut her feeding back to probably every 2 weeks, and at the start of next breeding season I'll pump her up with food to simulate that seasonal food abundance, and that works extremely well for me. So there you have it, guys. That's a technique that I use, which I call food cycling. That's some tips on how to select a female that's in her first breeding season, when she will be ready to breed. Let's talk about the 1,000-gram wall. What is the 1,000-gram wall? Well, the first thing it isn't is a 1,000-gram wall. Typically it occurs in snakes anywhere from about 800 grams to 1,200 grams, and typically we've been feeding our hatchlings since birth every week. Your snake has been running on full afterburner for a full year. Its fat glands are full, and physically it literally cannot eat anymore. Sooner or later your snake is going to go, I need a break here. I need to just sit down on the sofa with my feet up and just have a rest for a little while. And for a snake, that rest could be several months. That's what the 1,000-gram wall is. It's a direct result of the physiology of our snakes and the fact that we tend to overfeed them. Sooner or later, your snake is going to want to switch off its afterburners and take a break. If you feed your mature snakes every week, this is in effect taking your car down to the petrol station. The moment that the fuel gauge drops off the full mark, you sit at the petrol station with your foot flat on the accelerator, revving the car to the rev limiter whilst topping off the fuel tank. That's what you're doing with your snakes when you feed them every week. Your snakes, particularly mature snakes, do not need to eat every week. If you run them on full afterburner, sooner or later they'll burn out. You are almost certainly shortening the life of your snake if you feed it every week. They're not designed to run on full afterburner. So that's what I believe the 1,000-gram wall is. It has nothing to do with sexual maturity. It's just a function of the way that snakes work, their physiology, and sometime if we overfeed them, sooner or later they are going to go off food. They just need to take a break. Now, I have heard many breeders say that when your female goes off food at around 1,200 grams, that means she's ready to breed. So you stick a male in with her and that gets her back eating again. Imagine you are that female. You've just put your feet up on the sofa. you've got yourself a nice cup of tea, you're taking a break, you don't have your makeup on, your hair isn't done, you're not wearing perfume, you have not been scenting pheromones to attract a male, and along comes a male. And she goes, what the? The male goes, oh yeah, baby. Of course, the male is going to do the job that he is designed to do. Your female now is faced with, oh no, it's the breeding season. Can I not get 2 minutes peace? She's already told you she doesn't want to eat. She's already told you she wants to take a break. She's already told you she doesn't want to breed. So what do? Stick a male in with her. Surprise, surprise, she starts eating. We've talked about the physiology of snakes before. Snakes respond to stress, and yes, having a male around when you don't want one is stressful, as many of our ladies out there will know. And what happens is that our snakes respond to that stress by attempting to breed even if they don't want to. And that is why sometimes sticking a male in at the 1,000-gram wall does force a female to do exactly what she doesn't want to do and get her back on food. But trust me, it's never worth it in the long run. More than likely she will not go on to lay eggs. More than likely, if she does lay eggs, she will end up in terrible condition because she's underweight, and you'll get a very small clutch and she won't lay eggs again for another 2 years. That's what we do when we stick a male in with a female that's hit the wall. The most unnatural thing that we could ever do to our snakes. So that's my thoughts on the 1,000-gram wall. Sounds a little bit harsh, sounds as if I'm criticising other breeders. This is something that I don't do, but I know that many people do, and for some people it may work. So hey, if you want to do that, by all means go ahead, but just understand what it is that you're doing to your snakes and how your snake's physiology is forcing them to do something in response to what you have made them do, not in response to something that they want to do. So do bear that in mind. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe. And from me and this black pastel female here, see you next time.